Cars is a 2006 Pixar animated movie that is the first Pixar movie to be released in the midst of Disney buying Pixar. That, being honest right now, is a movie that I watched a lot as a child. Yep, alongside Finding Nemo and The Incredibles, this was actually one of the Pixar movies that I actually watched a lot back then. And in fact, it was also the first movie that I saw in theaters. Though, I remembered that experience being kind of rough, given that I remember being extremely shy around other people at the time. I don't remember what it was, but needless to say, I warmed up to the movie over time, and again, was one of the Pixar movies that I watched the most out of all of them. But all of this was when I was a child. Then when getting into internet critics, I found out about this movie and Cars 2's backlash online, and I ended up growing out of Cars. But that was because back then, I followed the crowd in regards to opinions a lot, even towards shows and movies that I haven't even seen. And by the way, no Billy Willy, I don't do that at all anymore. I don't let other people's opinions on shows and movies form what I think of them now. I form my own opinions now, regardless of their public reception, or if the public thinks they're good, bad, or okay. So, I figured for this review, that I'd revisit this movie to see if I still have the same feelings I did for this movie back then, or if it grew on me or not. And it's okay. Granted, there are better animated movies that I've taken a look at so far. Even the third movie, I believe, is better than this film, but there are also worse animated films for Sean's yearly reviews that trump this movie far down, that make this movie look tolerable in comparison, as well as worse Pixar movies. But Cars is definitely a middle-of-the-road movie, and is one of their weaker films. The film definitely has a lot of good things going for it, but also, it has things that hold it back significantly. What is this movie about? This movie stars an egotistical race car named Lightning Mcqueen. During a race, he and two other cars, the King and Chick Hicks, become tied for a winning race, leading there to be another race held in California to see who could break the tie. Due to a stunt by four delinquent cars, Lightning gets stranded from his trailer car named Mac, and he ends up in a little town named Radiator Springs, where he accidentally destroys the road, to which he has to fix the road that he destroyed in 5 days so that he could get to his big race that he needs to get to. Now, to get the big misconception with this movie out of my system, since this is the biggest point of discussion that people talk about with this movie, the main character, Lightning Mcqueen, starts off as a jerk in this movie, as he not only fired his pit crew chief, but he also talks about being a one-man show, and acts racist towards rustic cars, and is also uncaring towards everyone but himself. However, that's honestly kind of the point in what the movie is trying to go for. See, what separates this movie from something worse like Duck Duck Goose is that this movie is very self-aware about the fact that, yeah, Lightning is kind of a jerk and he got himself thrown into this situation, where because he didn't let Mac get some rest so that he could have the energy to get to California, he ends up getting trapped in Radiator Springs as a way to teach him a lesson to care about others. Whereas with Duck Duck Goose, that movie only got the teaching a jerk the lesson part, and literally nothing else to go along with it. So that movie had Ping be a jerk throughout, with no indicator of teaching a lesson not to be a jerk towards others. When it comes to Cars, on the other hand, it has this down pretty well. And there are signs that the movie is encouraging Lightning to learn a lesson, with the fact that the King is giving him advice to get a pit crew chief to help him, as well as Lightning's agent asking him to get himself some friends, which foreshadows what the rest of the movie would do. And Doc Hudson knows right away about how Lightning is like, given that he was thrown out because he was old news, and this was the point where the main message of what the movie is going for is a full wake-up call for Lightning, where he needs to learn to care about other people. And I also like how heartwarming this movie gets with the storyline about why Radiator Springs no longer gets customers. It was taken off the map because of an interstate being built to save people time, as well as Doc's backstory, and Lightning sacrificing the race in order to help the King, who had been injured. But now let's get on to the movie's issues. I know that this aspect of the film and franchise has been discussed to death, but this really does need to be stated right now. Why are the characters in this movie cars exactly? Why are the characters not humans? Like, the story would not change a single bit if the characters were humans, and the cars would just be something that they get into, and the story would remain exactly the same. And them being cars barely has any sort of effect on the story at all. Except for the part where, again, 4 delinquent cars cause Lightning to get thrown out of his own trailer, and Lightning feeling pain from the cactuses. But for the rest of the movie, this barely gives the movie a purpose for having these characters being cars. The only way I could see this work if this was another X thing does what others can't see them doing premise, like Toy Story or The Brave Little Toaster. But the film doesn't even go for that. And this film isn't something like Monsters, Inc., where it takes a creative spin on this, nor A Bug's Life or Finding Nemo, where them being bugs or fish had an effect on the characters. You can see the effects that birds, sharks, and whales have on all of them. With Cars, the characters being cars only raises a ton of questions. So, if these are cars and not humans, how do they reproduce? Do they just go to a random car shop to have them make a new car for them? Why would the cars even lock their doors if there's nobody that would even be able to look through their bodies, since, you know, everyone is a car in this universe? If tractors are basically cows or bulls in this universe, what is this movie's equivalent of a cat or dog? And I'm not going by the Pixar theory because it makes zero sense, if these are sentient cars, does this universe even have a creator? The movie does not think things through when it comes to its world building in the slightest. And there are other issues that I do have with the movie as well. For instance, the main character, Lightning. I get that he's supposed to be a jerk in the movie to basically emphasize the fact that he needs to learn a lesson, but there are times in the movie where he goes way too far, even by the movie's own standards, openly being prejudiced against what is, in the movie's own words, rusty old cars, which, and I don't know if this is what the movie was intending to do, but nowadays, this movie could come off as racist. Because what the movie is implying is that these cars are old people, and the movie also implies that they're hillbillies, which, is very not good in this movie's own favor. Lightning can also get very, very stupid in this movie, especially in the courtroom scene, where he's already in extreme hot water for the fact that he, on accident, destroyed Radiator Springs Road, and he makes things worse for himself with his attitude, and basically tries to flirt with Sally in a very arrogant manner. And generally speaking, this movie really doesn't have much going for it. The only novelties that this movie has is that it's a racing film, as well as the fact that this movie revolves around a jerk who needs to learn a lesson, and as punishment, spends time with those that live a less luxurious life than himself. But that's not unique to this movie. The Emperor's New Groove came out 5 or 6 years before this movie, and pretty much got the same point across, and I've heard that the movie is funny and had a hook to it, that being that it's a cartoony movie in the same vein as the Looney Tunes. Cars is just a movie that stars cars. And as I stated earlier, the movie doesn't really think things through in regards to this premise. And also, the movie doesn't even have anything interesting to really spice things up. It's a movie that is set in the desert, with a certain series of events happening, but with not much exciting things really happening. There are some adult jokes that did fly over my head when I was younger, particularly the scene where Lightning mentions that Doc won 3 piston cups before Mater becomes shocked, as well as a lot of other sequences, where because the characters are cars, you can't tell what the movie is implying. I guess the scene where Lightning and Mater were going tractor tipping was interesting, and the flashback to how Radiator Springs was like back then was tear-jerking, but most of the time, it's basically just Lightning needing to fix a road that also feels extremely rushed. And the parts where we get to know how Doc used to be like was heartwarming, but there are other sequences where he's goofing around to pad out the movie's runtime, despite the fact that earlier in the film, he was wanting to get out of there. So overall, Cars is just okay. It's definitely not as bad as I thought it was years ago, but at the same time, I don't think that it's good either. It's certainly better than Brave, because that movie has 0 point to being mean-spirited. It's better than The Good Dinosaur, because that movie being as slow and quiet as it is, results in a very hollow experience. And where I stand on Cars 2, I'll have to decide on my own, because it's been a while since I watched that, and I don't want to say it's bad right away because other people hate it, but it is one of Pixar's weaker movies, and I would say is one of the weaker movies I reviewed so far. But when thinking back on the other movies I just find average, this movie is pretty high in comparison to the others. So with that being said, overall, Cars has not exactly aged the best, but it's not bad either.
everything I